The city skyline glittered under the fading evening sun, glass towers reflecting the last streaks of daylight as traffic hummed below. Malcolm Hawthorne, CEO of Hawthorne Industries, leaned back in his ergonomic chair, staring at the spreadsheets on his monitor, though his attention was elsewhere. Success had always been a simple formula to him. Hard work equals results. He had built his empire from nothing, scaling a small tech startup into a multinational powerhouse. People respected him, some feared him, and all knew he expected excellence from those who worked under him. Yet tonight, something caught his attention that unsettled him in a way he hadn't felt in years. Most employees had left for the day, leaving the office unusually quiet. Only the janitorial staff moved through the polished floors, vacuums whirring and mops squeaking against the tiles. But in the corner, near the cafeteria, a lone figure lingered. Malcolm squinted. Naomi Rivers, a bright, diligent intern who had joined just 6 months ago. She wasn't loud or brash. She didn't ask for recognition, and she never complained. She did her work, quietly, efficiently, tirelessly. And yet, there she was, long after everyone else had gone, leaning over the counter, speaking in hushed tones with the night cook. Something about the scene seemed secretive, almost shameful, the way she hesitated before reaching under the counter, the way her shoulders slumped in relief once she received a small takeout container. Her movements were careful, deliberate, like she was hiding from the world, even in an empty office. Malcolm's curiosity pricked at him. He was the kind of boss who didn't meddle in his employees' personal lives. Work hard, get paid. That was the rule. But something about Naomi's behavior tugged at a corner of his mind he rarely allowed to exist. What happened to his employees after the office lights went out? He watched her tuck the container into her bag, glance around to ensure no one saw, then move toward the elevator with quiet urgency. Malcolm felt a pull he couldn't ignore. Rational thought screamed at him to stay put, to respect her privacy, to focus on the quarterly reports sitting on his desk. But another part of him, a part that had been dormant for years, flickered awake. He wanted to see, to understand. By the time he slipped into his coat and followed her into the crisp night air, Naomi was already several blocks ahead, her stride purposeful, but slow with exhaustion. Malcolm kept a careful distance, trying not to make his presence obvious. She moved toward the bus stop, carrying herself as if the weight of the world rested on her shoulders. And perhaps it did. The bus arrived, its lights flickering as it came to a stop, and Naomi stepped on without hesitation. Malcolm followed, paying the fare and taking a seat a few rows behind. The bus rattled forward, the hum of the engine filling the space. Outside, the city's neon glow gave way to dimly lit streets, aging buildings, and quiet neighborhoods far removed from the skyscrapers where he spent his days. This part of the city, Malcolm realized, was a world he had never truly seen. Naomi didn't check her phone. She didn't fidget. She just stared out the window, shoulders tense, eyes distant. Every stop, every cracked sidewalk, every flickering streetlight seemed to weigh on her. Malcolm felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest. How many nights had she done this? How often had she worked past exhaustion, carrying not only assignments, but the responsibility of surviving in a world that demanded more than she could give? Finally, the bus slowed, and Naomi pressed the cord for her stop. The doors hissed open, and she stepped onto the damp pavement, tightening her jacket against the cold. Malcolm followed, careful to keep his distance, until they reached a modest apartment complex tucked between two boarded-up storefronts. Naomi climbed the stairs to the second floor, unlocking a small door and disappearing inside. Malcolm froze outside, peering through the thin, yellowed curtains. What he saw made his stomach twist. The apartment was bare, stripped of comfort. No couch, no dining table, just a mattress on the floor, blankets, and a small plastic crate holding her folded clothes. And then 2 small heads peeked out from the side of the mattress, a boy and a girl, no older than 6. Naomi knelt beside them, moving with careful grace. She placed the takeout container on the floor and split its contents evenly between the children. They ate quickly, quietly, as if the meal were a rare treasure. Naomi watched, not eating herself, her eyes scanning for the smallest detail, ensuring they had enough. Malcolm stood frozen, realizing the gravity of what he had just witnessed. The childlike innocence of the room contrasted sharply with the harshness of their reality. A gust of wind rattled the sign outside. Malcolm took a step back, the weight of what he had seen pressing down on him. He had always believed that hard work alone defined success. Yet here was Naomi, diligent, committed, exhausted beyond reason, still fighting just to provide a basic meal for her children. His principles, his rules, even his own achievements, suddenly felt insufficient. A small voice broke the silence. "Mommy, are we going to have breakfast tomorrow?" Naomi's hands froze for a fraction of a second. Then, with quiet determination, she smoothed her daughter's curls back and whispered, "Of course, baby. I'll figure it out." But Malcolm could see through the calm. This wasn't certainty. It was a shield. A fragile barrier holding back worry, fear, and exhaustion from two little eyes that depended on her. Something shifted inside him. Years of building, strategizing, and managing had never prepared him for this. Leadership, he realized, wasn't just about productivity and deadlines. It was about understanding, compassion, and action for those whose struggles were invisible, whose efforts went unnoticed. He left that night with more questions than answers. Could he make a difference? Should he intervene? Or was he crossing boundaries he had no right to cross? One thing was certain: his life, and perhaps his understanding of success, would never be the same. The office lights, the spreadsheets, the empire he had built, they all suddenly seemed hollow against the stark reality of Naomi's fight to survive. Malcolm knew this was just the beginning. And deep down, he understood that the choices he made next wouldn't just affect Naomi. They could reshape the lives of countless others who worked tirelessly in silence, hoping someone would see them. The next morning, Malcolm Hawthorne sat at his sleek desk. The city stretching out in a patchwork of streets, glass towers and early commuters below. The office buzzed faintly with the hum of early activity, but his focus was fractured. Numbers on the screen blurred into meaningless patterns, rows of data rendered irrelevant by the image of Naomi kneeling on the floor, splitting a single takeout meal between her children. That image, simple yet profound, gnawed at him relentlessly. Normally, Malcolm would have faced a busy morning with precision, scheduling calls, approving shipments, and reviewing financial statements. But today was different. His mind replayed every moment of the night before. The exhaustion etched into Naomi's face, the fragile hope in her children's eyes, the careful movements she made to shield them from the harshness of their reality. How many employees like her had he overlooked? How many struggled silently, believing their hard work was enough to survive, only to fall short? By mid-morning, he found himself unable to ignore the pull toward action. He wasn't a man prone to impulsivity, yet he realized he had to know more. Not just for curiosity's sake, but because the weight of inaction now felt unbearable. He made a decision, careful but deliberate. He would confront the truth, even if it meant stepping far beyond the boundaries he had always maintained. After finishing a few urgent calls, Malcolm rose from his desk and made his way toward the stairwell, bypassing the elevator. His pace was purposeful, each step measured, though his heart raced. He wasn't going to confront Naomi directly in the office, not yet. He needed to understand the full scope of her reality, to see the life she led outside the polished corridors of Hawthorne Industries. The bus stop where he had followed her the night before came into view. Naomi hadn't arrived yet, and the street was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic. Malcolm considered turning back, reminding himself that this was crossing a line. Yet something deeper, more primal, compelled him forward. Soon, Naomi emerged from a side street, her tote bag slung over one shoulder, her coat wrapped tightly against the morning chill. She moved with the same quiet determination as the night before, her steps measured but heavy with fatigue. Malcolm fell into a careful rhythm behind her, maintaining enough distance to avoid detection, but close enough to observe every movement. The neighborhood unfolded as a landscape he had never known. Buildings were aged, paint peeling, storefronts shuttered, sidewalks cracked and uneven. It was a world apart from the glass towers and manicured streets he traversed daily. Malcolm felt a tight knot form in his chest. as he realized that this environment wasn't temporary or isolated. It was a persistent reality for countless workers like Naomi. Naomi's apartment complex was modest, almost unremarkable, yet it bore the marks of long-term wear, rusted railings, dimly lit corridors, and doors that had seen decades of use. She climbed the stairs, each step deliberate, and unlocked her door with practiced ease. Malcolm lingered outside, pressing himself lightly against the wall to observe. Inside, the scene unfolded exactly as he had glimpsed it the night before. The apartment was stark, functional, devoid of comfort. A mattress lay on the floor with a few folded blankets, a small plastic crate held neatly stacked clothes, and two small children, one boy, one girl, peeked out, eyes wide and hungry. Naomi moved toward them with careful grace, setting down the takeout container and distributing its contents evenly. The children ate quickly, deliberately, savoring each bite. Malcolm felt a pang of guilt and shame, mingled with awe. He had spent decades building a company that demanded excellence, yet he had never stopped to see the lives of those who enabled that success. He had assumed diligence and hard work were enough. Now, confronted with this reality, he realized how painfully inadequate that belief was. A small voice broke through the quiet. "Mommy, will we have breakfast tomorrow?" Naomi froze for a fraction of a second, then knelt beside her daughter, smoothing back her curls. "Of course, baby," she whispered. "I'll figure it out." Her voice was calm, but Malcolm could see through it. This was a shield, a fragile veneer of certainty that masked exhaustion, fear, and the relentless weight of responsibility. Something shifted inside him. All the strategic decisions, the late nights, the board meetings, all of it suddenly seemed secondary. Leadership was no longer about efficiency, profits, or deadlines. It was about people, their lives, their struggles, and the unseen burdens they carried. And Naomi, despite her brilliance and dedication, was shouldering far too much alone. Malcolm knew he faced a choice: retreat, respecting her privacy but leaving the injustice unchallenged, or act, risking his position, his reputation, and his comfort to make a difference. He hesitated only briefly before his instincts guided him. He would act. That afternoon, Malcolm called his assistant into his office. "Get me the contact for our corporate welfare initiatives," he instructed. "I need to review our employee assistance programs immediately." The assistant raised an eyebrow, sensing the urgency in his tone, and complied without question. Malcolm spent the next hour poring over documents, analyzing wage structures, emergency assistance provisions, and childcare benefits. Every line item, every policy suddenly bore a new weight, a new urgency. What he had once seen as standard operational procedure now seemed insufficient, inadequate, to meet the real needs of his employees. By late afternoon, he had made a decision. He would meet Naomi, not to interrogate, not to pity, but to understand and to offer meaningful support. He wanted to provide solutions, not charity. He wanted her to feel seen, valued, and supported in a way the system had never allowed. When Naomi arrived for her evening shift, she noticed his presence immediately. Malcolm didn't approach abruptly. Instead, he waited, observing her as she moved through the office with quiet diligence, preparing for the night's work. Her exhaustion was visible, yet her dedication never wavered. He felt a surge of respect and concern, mingling in a way he had never experienced before. Finally, during a quiet moment in the break room, Malcolm approached. "Naomi," he began, voice calm, measured, yet carrying an unspoken urgency. She looked up, startled, eyes widening slightly at the sight of the CEO in the same space. "I need to talk to you," he continued gently. "Not about work, not about performance, but about everything else. About your life outside these walls." Naomi's posture stiffened. For a brief moment, a flicker of fear crossed her face. She was used to being judged for her work ethic, her choices, her limitations. Yet Malcolm's tone lacked judgment, lacked the condescension she had come to expect. There was only concern, only recognition of the struggles she carried silently. She hesitated, then nodded. "Okay," she whispered, voice barely audible over the hum of the office lights. Together, they stepped aside and Malcolm listened as Naomi shared, in cautious, measured words, the reality of her life, The double shifts, the careful budgeting, the silent sacrifices made to ensure her children never went hungry. Every word deepened his understanding, every pause. Every measured phrase illuminated the resilience she displayed under conditions most people could never endure. By the end of the conversation, Malcolm felt the weight of responsibility settle firmly on his shoulders. He couldn't unsee what he had witnessed, couldn't ignore the systemic gaps that forced a diligent, capable employee to live in such precarity. That night, as Naomi returned to her children, Malcolm sat at his desk long after the office had emptied, drafting plans, making notes, envisioning structural changes, wage adjustments, emergency funds, and childcare support. For the first time, his leadership felt personal, moral, and urgent. The stakes were higher than profit margins, higher than investor expectations. This was about human lives, about dignity, about ensuring that no employee was left invisible or unsupported. And Malcolm knew the path forward would be challenging, fraught with resistance from the board, skepticism from colleagues, and logistical hurdles. But he also knew one thing with absolute certainty. He could no longer stand by. As the city slept outside his office windows, Malcolm felt a mix of determination, anxiety, and purpose. Naomi's quiet strength had awakened something in him that could not be silenced. And as he stared at the blank spreadsheet on his screen, he realized that the real work was only just beginning. The next morning, Malcolm arrived at Hawthorne Industries with a renewed sense of purpose. His suit felt heavier somehow, burdened with responsibility not just for profit margins or quarterly goals, but for the unseen lives that powered the company. As he strode through the polished corridors, he couldn't help but notice employees moving with their usual precision, unaware that their CEO's perspective had shifted dramatically overnight. Naomi's quiet resilience had left an indelible mark on him, a reminder that success without humanity was hollow. By 9 a.m., Malcolm was seated in the glass-walled boardroom, fingers steepled, eyes scanning the faces around him. The room was filled with executives and board members, men and women who had spent their careers analyzing numbers and quarterly reports, but who had never seen the weariness etched on the faces of warehouse workers or drivers pulling double shifts. Lisa Carter, his chief financial officer and longtime confidant, sat beside him, prepared with printed spreadsheets, projections, and contingency plans meticulously color-coded. Malcolm drew a steady breath. He had rehearsed this moment, yet no amount of preparation could replicate the emotional weight of the night before. The first to speak was Daniel Grant, a longtime investor known for his relentless skepticism. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, and eyed Malcolm with barely concealed doubt. "So, Malcolm," Daniel began, voice sharp and deliberate, "you're proposing an across-the-board wage increase, expanded benefits, and an emergency assistance fund for employees. Have I understood that correctly?" "Yes," Malcolm replied, calm yet resolute. "And I want you to understand why." He allowed a pause, letting the weight of the room's silence settle. "Because our people, the drivers, the warehouse staff, the clerks who keep this company alive, are struggling. Some of them are working double shifts, sacrificing sleep, meals, even family time, and still barely making ends meet. I saw it for myself. One of our employees, Naomi Hayes, works tirelessly and still had to ask for a meal. That's unacceptable." A murmur ran through the room. Lisa slid a report across the table, her movements precise. "We've analyzed the numbers," she said. "The cost is significant up front, but long-term retention, reduced turnover, and employee satisfaction will outweigh the initial expense. If we invest in our people now, they will invest in us." Daniel's brow furrowed. "Investing in people is one thing, Malcolm, but this is unprecedented. Shareholders will question it. Margins will take a hit. Where does it end?" Malcolm leaned forward, eyes steady, voice unwavering. "It ends when every employee is treated with dignity. It ends when no one has to choose between working extra hours or feeding their children. This isn't charity, it's sustainability. We cannot continue to build a company on human fatigue and silent suffering. Our growth is meaningless if it comes at the expense of those who make it possible." The room grew tense. Some board members exchanged uneasy glances. Others scribbled notes furiously, calculating potential impacts. Catherine Monroe, one of the company's senior investors, remained silent, her hands folded neatly on the table. Her gaze, sharp and analytical, seemed to pierce through Malcolm's resolve. Daniel pressed further. And if this doesn't work? What if we lose money, alienate shareholders, and destabilize the company? Malcolm's jaw tightened. He met Daniel's gaze without flinching. Then I take responsibility. Personally. I built this company from the ground up. If it fails on me. But it won't fail. Not because of the numbers, but because of the people. And if I'm willing to risk my own salary to ensure that, then you should ask yourselves why you are not willing to do the same. Lisa's eyes widened slightly, impressed despite herself. A flicker of surprise ran through the room. Some board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the weight of Malcolm's conviction palpable. A silence followed, thick and deliberate. Catherine spoke at last, her voice calm, deliberate. You are asking us to think beyond the next quarter, to consider sustainability and human value over immediate profit. It's bold, and perhaps necessary. She tapped the report lightly. I vote yes. One by one, other members followed. Not everyone, but enough to tip the scales. Malcolm exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing. This was more than a victory. It was a turning point. The company would change, and with it, countless lives.
Yet even in that moment, Malcolm's mind raced. This was only the first step. Policies, programs, and financial backing were one thing, but creating a culture of genuine support and care was another. He knew the real work lay ahead. Ensuring
Employees felt safe to voice struggles, creating transparent systems for aid, and maintaining the integrity of a program that could easily be exploited. After the meeting, Malcolm returned to his office alone but resolute. He opened a new document outlining immediate actions, wage adjustments, emergency support protocols, child care assistance, and structured feedback channels. Every word, every line, carried the weight of personal commitment. The office remained quiet as he worked, but the memory of Naomi and her children hovered like a shadow, a reminder that numbers and spreadsheets were insufficient without empathy and awareness. Malcolm knew he had to meet with Naomi again, not as an employee, not as a subordinate, but as a partner in creating real change. He needed her insight to ensure the solutions were practical, effective, and meaningful. Hours later, the city outside bathed in the golden glow of sunset. Malcolm found Naomi in the break room, exhausted yet poised. He approached carefully. Naomi, he began, voice steady, I want to talk to you again. Not about mistakes, not about work, but about solutions. I need your help to make this right for you and everyone else. Naomi's eyes widened slightly, surprise mingling with hesitation. She had learned to expect indifference, oversight, and judgment. But this was different. Malcolm's tone carried no authority, only sincerity. No expectation, only request. She hesitated, then nodded. Okay, she said softly, a quiet determination flickering across her features. Together they began the difficult work of translating empathy into actionable programs. They reviewed budgets, schedules, and logistics. Malcolm listened as Naomi spoke candidly about the pressures, sacrifices, and systemic gaps that employees faced daily. Every suggestion, every observation shaped his vision for a company that could truly support its workforce. Evening bled into night, yet Malcolm remained focused. He drafted communications for the board, prepared implementation strategies, and mapped long-term monitoring systems to ensure transparency and accountability. This was uncharted territory, risky, challenging, and controversial, but necessary. By the time he finally stepped away from his desk, the office was silent. The hum of the city below had faded into darkness, and yet Malcolm felt lighter. A sense of purpose had replaced the weight of obligation, a clarity of vision emerging from the chaos of realization. The work ahead was monumental, but he was no longer alone, and he was no longer blind to the human cost of corporate success. As he looked out over the city skyline, Malcolm realized that the night's revelations had altered not only his perspective, but the very trajectory of the company. and for the first time, he understood that true leadership wasn't about control or authority. It was about vision, courage, and the willingness to act when no one else would. The morning sun filtered through the glass walls of Hawthorne Industries, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Malcolm Reed walked briskly toward the main operations floor, his mind focused on the monumental task ahead. The boardroom. Vote had been won, but passing a resolution was one thing. Implementing it effectively was another. He had promised real change, not token gestures, and he knew that turning strategy into reality required both precision and empathy. Naomi Hayes was already at her workstation, quietly reviewing schedules and employee logs. Malcolm approached her, careful to maintain distance, yet determined to convey his trust. "Morning," he said. "I need your perspective on how we roll this out. If this is going to work, it has to be practical. I don't want any shortcuts." Naomi's eyes lifted, weariness evident, yet there was a spark, a faint glimmer of hope. "I can help," she replied, voice measured, deliberate. "But you need to understand the reality on the ground. Some people won't take it seriously, others will feel judged, and a few will resist outright." Malcolm nodded, appreciating her honesty. "That's why I need you. Help me anticipate those challenges before they become problems. We're not just handing out raises, we're changing a culture." Together they mapped out a phased plan. First, wage adjustments and overtime recalculations, ensuring every employee received proper compensation. Second, emergency support programs for situations like Naomi's. Food assistance, transportation vouchers, childcare aid, and flexible scheduling. Third, transparent communication, including town hall meetings where Malcolm himself would address employees directly. By mid-morning, HR and department managers were summoned. Malcolm and Naomi led a workshop, walking through the upcoming changes, fielding questions and addressing concerns. Some managers shifted uncomfortably, skeptical of the financial impact. One senior logistics coordinator whispered to a colleague, "This will blow the budget. I don't see how it's sustainable." Malcolm's voice cut through the murmurs, firm but calm. "We've run the numbers. I am personally responsible for ensuring that this works financially. What we cannot continue to do is ignore human need. Every person here is a cog in this company. Yes, but they're also people with lives, families and struggles we have been blind to. That stops today." The words resonated unevenly across the room. Some employees visibly relaxed, shoulders dropping as the weight of unacknowledged struggle lifted slightly. Others tensed, apprehensive about what these changes meant for workflow, expectations, and accountability. Naomi stood beside Malcolm, her presence steady, lending credibility to the message. Over the next few weeks, the ripple effect of the new policies began to manifest. Payroll adjusted seamlessly, the emergency fund became accessible for genuine cases, and childcare vouchers were processed without bureaucratic delay. Naomi served as a liaison between employees and management, ensuring that feedback was honest, actionable, and timely. She met employees privately, listening to their frustrations, fears, and hopes. The small gestures, flexible shifts, lunch stipends, and emergency support began to restore a sense of dignity that had long been absent. Yet resistance persisted. Some managers grumbled about pampering the workforce. A few middle-level supervisors struggled to adapt to new reporting structures that emphasized employee well-being alongside productivity. Malcolm observed these tensions quietly, knowing that real change always invites friction. One afternoon, during a routine check-in with operations, a particularly vocal manager confronted him. "Malcolm," the man said, arms crossed, face flushed. "I get that you want to help people, but some of us are accountable for margins. If employees start depending on handouts or perks, discipline goes out the window. You're risking everything." Malcolm met his gaze, calm but unwavering. "We are not giving handouts. We are acknowledging reality. If someone works double shifts, they shouldn't have to beg for food. This isn't charity, it's investment. Retention, loyalty, and performance improve when people feel valued. I am willing to risk my salary, my reputation, and my company for it. Are you? The manager's mouth opened, then closed, and he walked away without another word. Malcolm exhaled slowly, knowing that resistance would not vanish overnight. True transformation demanded persistence. Meanwhile, Naomi began to notice subtle but meaningful changes among the staff. Drivers who once arrived late out of exhaustion now came in rested. Warehouse employees were taking their scheduled breaks, conversations replacing whispered complaints about working conditions. The morale shift was tangible, almost electric, even if only incremental. Naomi herself felt a sense of validation, or a quiet relief that her struggles were being acknowledged and addressed. However, personal stakes remained high. Naomi still worried about her children, the small apartment she shared, and the precarious balance of surviving while excelling at work. Malcolm, aware of these private pressures, invited her for a candid discussion. They met in a quiet conference room, away from prying eyes. "You've been doing more than anyone could ask," Malcolm said, sincerity in his tone. "I want to make sure the support we're rolling out actually reaches you, and people like you." "Are we missing anything?" Naomi paused, considering her words carefully. "It's not just about money," she admitted. "It's about respect. People need to feel they can speak up without being judged. Some employees are afraid to ask for help because it's seen as weakness. That's the culture that's been ingrained for years." Malcolm nodded. "Then we change the culture, not just policies but attitudes, perception, the language we use. We start with transparency, listening, and accountability, and we make sure everyone knows it's safe to ask for help. You're helping me do that." Her eyes softened slightly, a mixture of relief and gratitude. "I didn't expect this," she whispered. "I didn't think anyone would notice, let alone act." Malcolm allowed himself a small smile. "You did more than anyone else. You showed me what I was blind to. But change did not go unnoticed by everyone. Some employees viewed the adjustments with suspicion, whispering rumors that perks were temporary or that favoritism would play a role. Certain managers covertly resisted, applying outdated rules to undermine policy implementation. Malcolm and Naomi worked tirelessly to address these challenges, holding one-on-one sessions, monitoring workflow, and intervening when friction threatened to derail progress. Weeks passed, and the results became clear. Employee satisfaction surveys reflected increased engagement, reduced stress, and greater loyalty. Turnover rates declined dramatically, saving the company time and money previously lost to hiring and training cycles. Naomi observed a subtle but powerful transformation. Employees who once dreaded double shifts now approached their work with renewed focus and dignity. One evening, after a long day of meetings and employee check-ins, Malcolm and Naomi stood by the operations floor window, looking out at the bustling activity. The hum of forklifts, the rhythm of trucks loading, and the chatter of workers formed a symphony of life within the company. "You see it too, don't you?" Naomi asked quietly. "I do," Malcolm replied. "This is only the beginning. The work we've done matters, but sustaining it requires vigilance. Systems fail without oversight. Culture erodes without attention. That's why we have to keep listening, keep adjusting, keep supporting." Naomi nodded, determination etched across her tired face. "And we will. Because people like us, we don't give up." Malcolm exhaled a deep, steady breath. He realized then that leadership was more than authority or strategy. It was empathy, courage, and the willingness to act even when it's hard. Naomi had reminded him that success without humanity was incomplete, and together, they were redefining what success meant at Hawthorne Industries. As the night settled, the office lights dimmed one by one, leaving Malcolm alone at his desk. A quiet reflection in the glass panes. He thought of Naomi's children, the struggles she had silently endured, and the ripple effect their actions would have on every employee who had been unseen and unheard for too long. Change had begun, but the journey was far from over. The first light of dawn spilled across Hawthorne Industries, illuminating the glass-walled offices and sprawling warehouse floors. It was quiet now, but the air was thick with anticipation. Today wasn't just another day of logistics and shipping. It was the day Malcolm Reed had promised a reckoning, a test of whether change, once initiated, could take root and flourish. Malcolm arrived early, walking briskly through the main operations floor. Workers were beginning to trickle in, their movements deliberate yet curious. Rumors had already begun circulating about the changes: wage increases, emergency assistance programs, flexible scheduling, and childcare support. Eyes followed him, some curious, some cautious. He stopped at the break room, where Naomi Hayes had been gathering employees for a morning briefing. "Morning," Malcolm said, his voice calm yet resonant. "Today is different. You are different. The hard work you've all been putting in, sometimes without recognition, will no longer go unnoticed. We've listened, we've acted, and we will continue to act." A ripple of surprise moved through the room. Many employees had never heard Malcolm speak directly to them outside of operational instructions or performance reviews. Now standing in front of them, he spoke not as a CEO enforcing rules, but as a leader acknowledging humanity. Naomi stood beside him, her posture firm, radiating both exhaustion and quiet pride. Malcolm continued, outlining the details of the new programs: wage adjustments, comprehensive benefits, emergency support, and childcare assistance. Each announcement was punctuated with real examples, how these changes would affect individual employees, including those who had silently struggled for months or even years. Workers leaned forward, eyes widening, whispers of disbelief mixing with cautious hope. One young driver, Marcus, raised his hand tentatively. "Sir, so this isn't temporary? It's permanent?" Malcolm met his gaze, unwavering. "Permanent. We're investing in you because you are investing in this company every single day. Your work, your time, your dedication, those are not numbers on a spreadsheet. They are the foundation of Hawthorne Industries, and it's time we treat them as such." A wave of murmurs swept the room, some skeptical, others emotional. Malcolm noticed Naomi watching the reactions, a subtle mix of relief and validation on her face. For her, it wasn't just about policies. It was about dignity restored, about proving to herself and everyone else that hard work could coexist with compassion. Over the next few weeks, the effects were tangible. Absenteeism dropped dramatically, morale improved, and productivity reached levels previously thought impossible. Employees who once arrived late or exhausted began to show up energized, carrying not just packages, but renewed pride in their work. Naomi's colleagues often asked her advice, seeking guidance on how to balance responsibilities while taking advantage of new programs. She became a quiet ambassador of change, bridging the gap between management and staff, translating policy into practice. Yet change, even positive change, always has friction. Some managers who had resisted initially continued to struggle with the new culture. They questioned whether employees were becoming complacent, whether accountability was being diluted. Malcolm approached these challenges strategically, combining empathy with firm standards. One afternoon, he called a meeting with the senior management team. "Listen," he began, "this isn't about leniency. It's about fairness. Yes, employees will have support. Yes, they will have flexibility. But expectations remain. Excellence is non-negotiable. What changes is the foundation. We're building loyalty and respect, not fear and exploitation. Understand that, and you'll see results beyond any profit margin on paper." Gradually, even the most resistant managers began to see the shift. Employee engagement surveys showed improved satisfaction. Turnover rates dropped. The company's bottom line stabilized, paradoxically benefiting from higher retention and motivated staff. Malcolm's gamble had worked, not because it was financially calculated, but because it was humanly correct. Amid these systemic changes, Naomi's personal life transformed as well. The emergency assistance programs ensured her children had proper meals, reliable transportation, and educational support. She no longer returned home each night carrying the weight of exhaustion mixed with hunger and fear. Malcolm visited occasionally, not to patronize but to check in to ensure the programs reached those who needed them most. Naomi's gratitude was quiet but profound, a reflection of resilience tempered by hope. One evening, as Malcolm reviewed operational reports from his office, Naomi knocked lightly and entered. "Sir," she said, "I just wanted to thank you. Not just for me, but for everyone. What we're doing, it matters. It's changing lives." Malcolm leaned back in his chair, eyes thoughtful. "It does matter, and it's only the beginning. Change is never a single moment, it's continuous. We'll keep listening, adapting, and supporting, but yes, it matters." Naomi's smile was small, private, yet it carried immense weight. "It's more than I ever imagined," she admitted. As weeks turned into months, the cultural transformation at Hawthorne Industries became the new standard. Employees spoke openly, collaborated more effectively, and approached their work with renewed commitment. The company's reputation grew, not just as a logistics powerhouse, but as an employer that valued people, showing that ethical leadership could coexist with business success. Malcolm often reflected on that night, months ago when he had followed Naomi home. What he saw, the struggle, the quiet dignity, the relentless perseverance, had shattered his previous assumptions about success and work ethic. It had forced him to confront the limitations of purely results-driven leadership and embrace a holistic approach, one that acknowledged the human cost behind every metric and deadline. Naomi's story became emblematic within the company, a reminder that even the most resilient individuals need support, and that leaders have a responsibility to recognize and act upon systemic inequities. The ripple effect extended beyond Hawthorne Industries. Other companies in the industry began to take note. Inspired by the tangible improvements in productivity, morale, and community engagement, one quiet evening, Malcolm stood at the operations floor window, gazing out at the bustling activity. Forklifts hummed, trucks loaded and departed, and employees moved with purpose and pride. He thought of Naomi's children, the struggles she had endured, and the countless employees who had silently sacrificed for the company. A sense of fulfillment settled over him, deeper than any profit margin could provide. Change had begun with empathy, courage, and willingness to act. It had been risky, met with resistance, and required personal sacrifice. Yet, as Malcolm reflected on the journey, he realized that true leadership was not measured solely in profits or growth charts. It was measured in lives improved, dignity restored, and hope rekindled. The moral was clear: success achieved without humanity is incomplete. The greatest leaders are those who see beyond numbers, who act with compassion, and who ensure that those who labor tirelessly are seen, supported, and celebrated. Malcolm had learned that lesson not from a boardroom, but from observing a single, resilient employee who refused to break under the weight of circumstance. Naomi had not only changed her life, she had changed the culture of an entire company, leaving a legacy of empathy, courage, and transformation. As the lights dimmed and the warehouse settled into the evening quiet, Malcolm knew one thing for certain: the story of Hawthorne Industries would not be remembered for its profits alone, but for the people who made it great, and the leader brave enough to honor them. And in that quiet, reflective moment, he allowed himself a small, contented smile, knowing that real success had finally found its true meaning.